As the aircraft approached the runway, the pilots gripped the control, their knuckles turning white. The instrument panels in front of them showed no sign of life. There were no lights, no sounds. For the last 2 hours, they had been flying blind, relying only on their instincts and training. But somehow, despite everything, they had made it this far. Their lives and the lives of the 138 passengers on board would be decided in the next few seconds. The pilot took a deep breath and plunged the nose of the plane toward the ground. In today's episode of the Infographic Show, we'll tell you about one of the scariest moments in modern aviation history, as a pilot was forced to do the impossible. On the 15th of September 2006, an EasyJet plane was scheduled to take off on a short jaunt from Alicante, Spain to Bristol, England. EasyJet, a budget airline that specializes in ferrying passengers across Europe, was using an Airbus A319-111, a popular smaller aircraft. The crew of 6 was soon joined by 138 passengers, many of them vacationers who had been spending an early fall getaway in the town of Alicante, a popular port city with its pristine beaches. They were all, no doubt, looking forward to an uneventful flight, but this one would be anything but. Everything seemed to be fine with the plane, having logged almost 2,000 airframe hours and over 1,400 takeoffs and landings. But problems have a way of announcing themselves at the worst possible times. The aircraft had previously suffered a failure involving its left generator, which was then powered off. After all, there was a backup and there were no issues with it. It was decided not to delay the flight and to proceed with the auxiliary power unit providing the power to the left side of the plane. The plane departed Alicante and the pilots hit cruise control. Then the passengers settled in to relax for a roughly 2.5-hour flight. That was when things started to go terribly wrong. Around 85 minutes into the flight, disaster struck. The aircraft suffered a devastating electrical failure, causing the carefully structured backups to fail, and many key elements of the flight system became completely inoperable. The first hint of this was the captain's electronic flight instrument display going dark, the key system used to display all flight data. The crew was suddenly flying blind at 32,000 feet, and it just got worse from there. The autopilot, which had been guiding the plane to its destination, was now dead. The pilots would have to bring this plane home on their own, the old-fashioned way, which was going to be very difficult. Airplanes in the modern era use a wide array of complicated electronic equipment to keep abreast of their own flying conditions and those of the planes around them, and they were almost all down. This included the Electronic Centralized Aircraft Monitoring System, or ECAM, which keeps track of the aircraft's fuel supply and other key factors, and the TCAS, or Traffic Alert and Collision Avoidance System. This alerts the aircraft of flights near them to let them keep a wide distance and ensure safe passage. EasyJet 6074 was a tin can in the middle of the air with 144 souls on board, and no one knew it. The radios were also out, meaning not only were the pilots flying blind, but the planes around them were as well. On one of the busiest flight corridors in Europe, airplanes rely on up-to-the-second updates from the planes around them and the air traffic controllers to maintain a safe distance. And the onboard transponder was out as well. That meant that the flight suddenly disappeared from the radar. 10 minutes before a shift change, and an unfortunate air traffic controller was about to walk into the chaos. And both above and below, everyone had to act fast. On board the plane, the pilots faced an impossible choice. They were flying without any on-air support or any interaction with air traffic controllers, with planes all around them. They had two options: try for an emergency landing or soldier on to Bristol. The first option, with many airports in France, was the much quicker option, but there was one big problem with it. They had no way of letting anyone know they were coming. A plane coming in fast with no warning would make people on the ground think of only one thing: hijacking. In 2006, the sudden arrival of aircraft with no communication would be likely to send jets scrambling. In the best-case scenario, a military escort would take the plane to the nearest safe landing spot, and the pilots would immediately be met with armed officers with many questions. In the worst-case scenario, an incommunicado plane would be shot down by France's air defense to prevent a much worse disaster, taking everyone on board with it as a necessary sacrifice. And the pilots decided they couldn't take the chance. They had no way of knowing if the military would turn hostile and would potentially be flying blind into an attack with no way of communicating back. The only option was flying on to the UK and trying to safely find Bristol, but they would be doing it in a field packed with other planes, and even one wrong move could send not just them, but another plane down in a fiery crash. They needed to find any way of alerting the planes around them and it would take both pilots to pull it off. It was go time. The pilot checked his instruments. They were still down, but somehow, due to the nature of the failure, the co-pilot still had some lower functions available on his instruments. He would be able to fly the plane. Not exactly the circumstances every co-pilot dreams of, but at least they had some control. This would allow the lead pilot to devote his entire efforts to solving the complex mechanical puzzle. He troubleshooted many of the key elements of the control system, but was unable to re-establish contact with air traffic control. And all the lives on board and more were in the hands of the authorities. On board, the pilot spoke with a senior crew member and instructed them on how to communicate with the passengers, many of whom were no doubt aware something was wrong but had no idea how serious. The goal would be to ensure everyone took proper emergency procedures, but to keep them calm to avoid panic when they realized their lives hung in the balance. But they wouldn't be able to keep the truth hidden for too long, because the flight deck was starting to get cold. The climate control systems had been partially knocked out as well, and while the flight was well insulated, the bitter cold of a high-altitude flight was starting to creep its way in. The air level was getting low as well, but it would be sufficient for the passengers on board until the plane was hopefully on the ground, especially as they weren't exerting themselves. The bigger challenge was for the crew members, who were more active. They considered putting on their oxygen masks, but that could alarm the passengers. Now they just had to make it to Bristol. The flight commander made several attempts to contact air traffic control by phone, but the system was dead, including at a lower altitude. Air traffic control was flying blind as well, unable to detect the plane and not sure if it was still in the pilot's control. And there were hundreds of planes in the air. They made a difficult decision to enlist another plane in the search for answers. American Airlines Flight AAL-63, a larger jet, was asked to descend to 31,000 feet and see if they could spot the EasyJet to confirm it was still in the air. At 11:01 local time, both planes would hang in the balance. The 777 descended to the requested level, and the pilot scanned the skies, eventually seeing the EasyJet flying overhead. This close call was completely oblivious to the two pilots of the EasyJet, who were busy continuing to try to obtain any contact with air traffic control. They were unable to get the communication systems working, and to fly to Bristol or any other airport off schedule with no warning could spell disaster. But maybe there was a way to provide a warning. The transponder of the EasyJet was still down, keeping them and everyone else in the dark about what was going on around them. With the cockpit getting colder and the air getting thinner, the commander continued his work at trying to reconfigure the transponder. He wasn't having much success with the main instruments, but he was able to get the transponder running just long enough to change the code from the standard flight code. He gave it the new code 7700, the General Emergency Code. As soon as that code showed up on the system, everything changed. The ATC was able to detect the plane and know something was wrong, and they were able to see that the American Airlines plane was around 30 seconds away from a devastating mid-air collision with the partially disabled plane. The larger jet changed course, veering away from the incommunicado plane, and what would have been one of the worst aviation disasters in modern European history was averted. But now the EasyJet still had to guide its 144 souls home. On board, the pilot continued to try to reconfigure the electric system, but the limited success he had with the transponder would prove to be the end of the road. The co-pilot was left to largely plot their course without the aid of modern conveniences, relying on the practiced nature of the route and the limited view that he had out the window. Fortunately, they still had limited control of the machinery of the aircraft, which wasn't completely controlled by the computers. They had questions about the hydraulic system, but the flaps deployed normally. And on the ground, tensions were high. Bristol knew a flight with an emergency was coming in for a landing, but no one fully knew what to expect. All departures and takeoffs at the airport were temporarily suspended, and crews were brought in for an emergency rescue if needed. Everyone watched the skies nervously. The situation could be anything from a hostage situation to a medical emergency. And soon the flight started coming into view on the radar. Now came the most difficult part, the landing. The flight commander attempted to deploy the landing gear, but there was no confirmation from the system, and he didn't hear the associated sound of the deployment. If the landing gear failed, it could mean a crash landing. Not a full crash due to the hydraulic system, but a still very hard landing that could mean injuries or deaths. As a last-ditch effort, he used the emergency gear extension system, and gravity took care of the rest. The landing gear began to extend as they started coming in for a landing. But would it be enough? The plane came in fast, touched down hard, and the commander used heavy manual braking to slow it down as it hit the runway. Slowly, it came to a stop, but the engine was still running and wouldn't shut down even when the master switches were turned off. The commander finally succeeded in turning it off using the engine fire switches, and everyone on the runway anxiously watched the plane to see what was waiting inside. Slowly, the doors opened, and one by one, 138 passengers, 4 crew members, and the 2 pilots all came off the flight, shaken, cold, but completely uninjured. The 2 pilots had pulled off one of the most amazing feats in modern aviation, bringing a plane from Spain to the United Kingdom almost entirely devoid of modern conveniences, using their smarts, some jerry-rigging, and a whole lot of luck. If you're wondering who those brave, intrepid pilots were, we don't really know. Unlike Sully Sullenberger, the man who pulled off an incredible water landing in the United States, they didn't become household names, or any names at all. From what we know of the 2 pilots, the flight commander was a 42-year-old male veteran pilot, and the co-pilot was a 34-year-old with significant experience. They were questioned on their actions, commended for handling the crisis, and went back to their jobs without appearing on any reality TV shows. In the aftermath, investigations were conducted on the plane itself, which tracked the failure to the AC Bus 1, a critical component that distributes the power to many of the components on the aircraft. The larger failure wasn't detected when the generator issue was found in the previous journey, so the flight was allowed to proceed to near disaster. And while the problem was repaired, the entire close call was a very important lesson. When crisis strikes in the air, there is no substitute for a steady pair of hands on the wheel. For another dramatic plane disaster, check out What Really Happened to the Missing Malaysian Airlines Flight 370, or watch this video instead.